that I'll touch on in a couple of minutes. Now, one part of place making is actually what I call maybe corridor making corridors into places you want to work in, shop in, and even live in. Now, I'm sure you don't ever have this in this part of the country, but a lot of places in this country, in this case, this is Spokane, Washington, because there's this feeling, there's this myth among planners and public officials, maybe some economic development people, that if you zone it, people will come. If you zone the area out there for, 5 billion square feet of high-paying retail, you'll get it. Well, the problem is you can overzone. You can zone more land for a particular use than there is market capacity to absorb. So Spokane, Washington figured this out. This is all of their retail zoned land, and they only need about a quarter of it to meet their retail needs. Now, the trouble with zoning is that when you zone something retail or office, you can't build residential without a zone change battle. So the overzoning basically forces the economy to underperform in other activities that are economically feasible. And so then you displace the economically feasible activities from where it's economically efficient to where it's economically inefficient. Right? So Spokane did the smart thing. They inventoried their residential zoning and uses, their retail zoning and uses, did market studies to figure out where the market was going, what would be needed to meet the market for all land uses, residential, retail, institutional, office, and so forth. And this was their corridor plan then for some Sprague Street in Spokane. Retail's down to where it should be. Retail is right-sized. Office is right-sized. Residential is now allowed to move into the corridor where it was prevented before. And oh, by the way, when you have residential near retail, you get something called synergism, which means you get more dollars circulating in the economy, which means you support more workers and pay more taxes, have higher incomes. These are the kinds of things we need to try to achieve through placemaking along these corridors. But not to be outdone, we have all the shopping centers. I'm sure you have a couple around here. Shopping centers die, and they don't die nicely. It'd be one thing to go out and shoot a shopping center. You can't do that in most cases. So shopping centers start, this one in particular, this was in El Paso, Texas. So this is about a 35-year-old shopping center. It starts off, gangbusters, all kinds of money, all kinds of tax revenue, good employment. But shopping centers hit their peak about 10 years, 15 years after they're built. And unless they're continually reinvented, they lose their market share, often to other shopping centers, right? And so shopping centers decline in employment, taxables, sales, and so forth and so on, and they ultimately blight the whole neighborhood. Well, so what El Paso did, and what many other communities across the country are doing, they're redesigning, rethinking, rebuilding shopping centers. This is the El Paso new design. Bus rapid transit. We have residential here along the plaza. We have retail and office around the edges. We have institutional at the edges too. Plenty of parking still. And we integrate this with the neighborhood. We don't separate it from the neighborhood. This is, who wants to live here? And looking at the sea of parking, when you right size and do the shopping center redevelopment right, you make areas across the shopping center even more attractive, not less attractive, for investment. Now, Las Vegas, the Strip, and downtown are both dynamic areas. And we should take advantage of these dynamic areas to think of opportunities to create economic development opportunities where none existed before. Now, this is an example of Columbus, Ohio. In the mid-1970s, Columbus, Ohio thought it was going to compete against suburban shopping centers by building a downtown shopping center, and it didn't work. It was architecturally abysmal. The market wasn't there anyway. Who would have to shop at a downtown shopping mall in Columbus, Ohio? Maybe here in Vegas, I don't know, even about here. So the city did a very smart thing. The city said, let's kill it. So they shot it, tore it down, built a downtown green, and not just, green that you couldn't really walk on. This is an active green. People play soccer on here, they have picnics, they have events here, shows, everything else. And now what's happening is there's more investment in residential and office going on around this downtown plaza than existed when you covered the plaza up with this non-functional shopping mall. So there's lots of opportunities to reshape our corridors, reshape our shopping centers and strip centers and even downtowns to create the economic development opportunities that are there. Here's another example of a shopping center, Belmar in Lakewood, going from blight basically to new design. One thing I didn't show here, I should have. The local government is generating something like $5 million net new tax revenue over and above costs per year from this redevelopment. Now, I know a lot of locally elected officials around the country, and once they see net new tax revenue above costs coming in by changing urban form, their eyes light up. That gives most of them a chance to spend more money, of course, or others to maybe cut taxes to spread the benefits around to other taxpayers. A key feature of creating places or place-making objectives is to create walkable neighborhoods connected between themselves, forming walkable communities and even walkable cities. Well, what is a walkable neighborhood? It's comprised of a mix of uses with residential, office, retail, public spaces to create outdoor rooms that connect each other. Now, you have it easy here because your out of doors is almost all year round pleasant to walk in. But you can achieve walkable outdoor rooms in Seattle, Washington, Cleveland, Ohio, and they're doing this. In some of the dreariest climates in the country, they're creating outdoor rooms that people fill despite the weather they have. Now, Dan Burden, who's a fairly famous person in my field in placemaking, has three important or interesting observations to me about his mission in life to create walkable communities. Now, he is a transportation engineer. He has a master's degree in transportation engineering. He started his career building streets to kill people. He ended his career building streets to save people and kill cars. So cars are happiest when there are no other cars around. People are happiest when there are other people around. Of the 1,400 communities he's walked, he's not found one where designing for the car has made it a successful place. And we've learned that there's a lot of America that's been destroyed by cars and parking lots and the rest of it, but it's waiting to be recrafted and repurposed. And that's this whole idea of placemaking through corridor redevelopment, shopping center redevelopment, maybe some downtown redevelopment, and the rest of it. So now let's go into some studies of how the market responds to walkability, placemaking, and so forth. There's a group called WalkScore, and they've come up with a very interesting set of algorithms that estimates for any home in most of America, including Las Vegas, an objective measure of walkability. 100 on their measure would mean you're within 1/4 of a mile of each of these 13 destinations. If you're 0, that means you're out more than 1/4 mile walking distance from all of these 13 destinations. So what happens when we improve the walk score of communities? There's what's called the walkability premium that office and retail spaces will pay in order for their customers or their workers or their visitors to be able to access their businesses by not just driving to them, but also being able to walk to them. So it turns out that if you have a 10-point increase in walk score between 60 and 70, let's say, office office property value will rise 9%, and the NOI, net operating income, a measure of performance, will rise by 7%. Exactly the same, actually, for retail. So we know that the non-residential markets respond favorably to improved walkable communities. It's also the case for improved walkable neighborhoods. This is the single-family residential premium. So we find in Arlington, Virginia, for example, a 1 point increase in walkability score increases the average price of the home by $1,700. Arlington's a high-class area, but it's even more in Austin, which has half the values, home values, as Arlington. San Francisco, sort of the usual suspects, but you see that an increase in walkability is valued in the market for homes or retail or office. There's another kind of value that we're just now figuring out at my research center, Metropolitan Research Center at the University of Utah. This is yet an unpublished report. We just finished it last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. What we're finding is that the market will pay 3% more for every 1,000 feet closer to a performing arts facility than farther away. They didn't say that right, but you get the idea. So the market will pay more to be closer to these activities than farther away by these rough percentages. So a $200,000 house, modest house by any USA standards, except Joplin, Missouri, where that would be high end. That's a $6,000 value increase, and you run the numbers up from there. Okay, transit-oriented developments is a kind of place-making activity. Far fewer in number, because we have far fewer TODs, or train stations, than shopping centers and strip centers and office parks and the rest of it. TODs refer to higher density development with pedestrian priority, we hope anyway, located within easy walking distance of major public transit stations. Usually fixed guideway stations, light rail, heavy rail, which you don't have here, commuter rail, and bus rapid transit, as distinguished from regular bus transit. So by design, or by hope anyway, TODs can increase walking activity, accommodate growth, generate new economic development, and create places within their own design areas. This is the standard TOD model, which our shop, the Metropolitan Research Center, is rethinking, reshaping. We'll have some publications coming out this fall and also next year. The old model said, design your principal area for TODs within a quarter-mile walking distance, or a quarter-mile distance from the station. This is your primary absorption area. This is your secondary absorption area up to half a mile. And this is sort of what's called transit support area. Maybe you get some people walking here. Maybe some businesses are affected by the proximity to rail. But basically, not much going on here. This is the standard model. The standard model also says that, jobs will be happy to locate within about a quarter mile. That's probably right, actually. And population within maybe half mile of transit stations. And there's all kinds of studies sort of supporting this sort of standard model, catchment area. And indeed, what we find for the commercial property around the West Coast, basically, or studies around the country, within a quarter of a mile or so, the real estate market for office and retail improves because of proximity to transit stations. So the market, the commercial non-residential market, in fact, responds within that quarter-mile distance. We also know this. We did a BRT study for Eugene, Oregon, and found that within the quarter mile, most of the jobs shifted in the Eugene, Oregon area away from where they were to within a quarter mile of the BRT stations, and very few shifted to the area between a half mile and a quarter mile and a half mile. So I think we've got the capture shed for non-residential just about right, but I think we're missing the mark on the residential. And by the way, most TODs will survive or be successful because of the residential component. If they don't have a strong residential component, they will not be successful over time. So, how did we come up with the 1/4 mile planning area for TODs? This came out of the 1980s. And so when you read the literature on TODs, you'll see the reference to the standard 1/4 mile radius. And the 1/4 mile radius is because somebody thought, how long are people willing to walk to get from A to B? 10 minutes. Okay, how far is a 10-minute walk? The only literature at the time, early 1980s, was the recreational walking studies that showed a walk in the park speed was 2 miles per hour. And that gave you a 1/4 mile distance, give or take a couple hundred feet. So we designed our urban TODs based on a park walking speed. So one of my graduate students, when I was at Virginia Tech with Rob Lang, one of our students asked the question, well, how far do people walk in an urban area? Nobody had the answer. So his thesis was on collecting all the studies he could find all around the world, and what he found was that if you're walking with a purpose in a city, from this building to that building, business to business purpose, that walk with a purpose, you elevate your speed to 3 miles per hour, and you cover 2,000 feet, roughly, in that 3 mile per hour speed. But if you're in Singapore, London, Paris, New York, San Francisco, you're walking with much more assertiveness. You're walking 3.9 miles an hour. And you're covering almost a kilometer at that pace. So we came up with our schemata of walkability, of walking speeds for TOD design. We have the walk in the park, we have the business walk, and we have the New York walk. So we're encouraging everybody around the country, including you as you're thinking now about light rail and even BRT, think in terms of 1 kilometer planning areas at an absolute minimum around your stations. And oh, by the way, the amount of land that becomes accessible for planning purposes increases from 125 acres. That 1/4 mile distance is 125 acres. The kilometer radius gives you 800 acres to plan. Acres. That 1/4 mile distance is 125 acres. The kilometer radius gives you 800 acres to plan. You should plan your TODs also for staging, expecting transitional and replaced land uses. So I was in San Jose last week, and they've zoned their TODs in their downtown for like a 20 minimum FAR, which means you can only build a 24 building to 40 floor building near the TODs or in the TODs in San Jose. And they're wondering why they're not getting these buildings. I'm telling them, start small. You'll get there in 50 years, 100 years, but allow maybe the 1 FAR buildings to go in, the buildings that will rise up that are easy and cheap to tear down in 20 years, 30 years tops. Give the planning, give the market the time to understand the benefits, capitalize the profits in the near term to then reinvest in the long term. Give yourself time. But we might want to argue for even a longer planning area, larger planning area for the residential component. So my doctoral student, Susie Petheram at Utah, she'll be finishing this year, she's come up with a very innovative way to measure the market valuation of proximity between apartments and transit stations, in this case light rail stations, of which we have a lot. We have 4 rail lines, 41 stations, 35 miles of tracks. So she collected information on all 4,000 apartment buildings in Salt Lake County, and she did a hedonic regression analysis. Now, a lot of studies on residential say you have a residential premium within 1/2 mile, but the premium stops after 1/2 mile. That's because their study design says if you're within 1/2 mile, we'll count you as a 1. If you're outside, we'll count you as a 0. Hedonic analysis using binary stats. It's not accurate enough. So she went through 1/4 mile analyses and found that by 1/4 mile strips of distance, the apartment market confers indeed the highest premium within the first 1/4 mile, almost, well, more than $7 per square foot for apartments. But between 1/4 mile out to 1¼ miles, there's about a $3 premium per square foot in all distance bands. Going to non-significant at 1.25 miles, which tells us as a planner that we should be planning for at least the apartment residential component around TODs out to 1.25 miles. Now, it's not that a person would walk 1.25 miles, especially in July here, to a transit station. It's that their roommate might give them a lift, or they take their bicycle, or more than likely, and something else we need to plan for, they'll walk out the building, across the street or down the block to catch the bus. And the bus takes you right to the transit station. It's a 10-minute drive, or maybe a 5-minute drive, comparable to the walking distance you're accustomed to, and that's how you then create this synergism between the transit stations and the residential markets that you want. We're looking at the extent to which the detached market, the townhouse market, and the condo market also has this kind of stair-step result. And we'll have news later on this fall about that. Okay. I'm going to bomb through these. Reed Ewing in our shop, who's basically an engineer, mechanical engineer by training, is maybe one of the world's top 5 transportation land use analysts. And we're pleased to have him in our shop because he's doing some very innovative things. One of those things is creating what he calls a compactness index. Now, you might think of compactness as, more people in the same space. It's just basically density. But his measure of compactness includes, yes, density in 6 different features, different kinds of ways of looking at density, mixed uses, with that density, mixed uses in certain ways, jobs, housing balance, service jobs, housing balance, job mixing, and so forth. Centering, the extent to which centers are themselves identifiable places in the landscape that people relate to. And street accessibility, including percentage of 4-way intersections and block lengths and everything else. So when you add up all of these features, and I'm calling it, over his objections, I'm calling it the Ewing Compactness Index because he invented it. And my next publication uses the term Ewing Compactness Index. He's a co-author with 3 other co-authors, and we outvoted him. So we're going to make sure that he gets rewarded for his pioneering thinking in this area. And you will begin to see this creeping up in literature over time. What Reed comes up with is that like an IQ score, a score of 100 is sort of like median. We're all above 100 here in IQ, right? We're above average in intelligence. I think, anyway. Well, Clark County, basically Las Vegas, Clark County is 123.5. It's a little less than, it's almost towards genius in compactness. So that's where you are now. You're above average, but there's a lot more to go here in my view. You have all of the bones, you have the corridors that are BRT and light rail ready. You've got a large amount of open spaces available along these corridors. You've built shopping centers 30 years ago, 20 years ago that are becoming ripe for redevelopment. They're not ripe yet, maybe some are, but over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, these are targets of opportunity for massive investment and redevelopment with huge economic development payoffs. So if we I glossed over this. So I ran some numbers. He comes up with the index. I ran the regression equations to find out that a 10% increase in the Ewing compactness score, maybe going from 100 to 110, will increase jobs by 0.6% over and above what you'd have anyway. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, right? 0.6% with a 10% increase. Only put this in context. The U.S. urbanized areas, not all the land area, including prairie lands, but the urbanized land areas in the U.S. run about 2,500 people per square mile. That's about 1.5 residential units per acre. But that includes all the residential, all the non-residential, everything else. If we were to double that to 3 units per acre on average, which you can still do with single-family detached as the primary mode, if we were to move from 1.5 national average to 3 national average, we would have added 10 million new jobs to this economy from this result. We lost 9 million jobs during the recession. We still would have lost those jobs, but we would have had 1 million more jobs after the recession that we lost by using this compactness score. And what's happening in the economy is that when you mix the uses right, and mix the densities right, and have shared accessibility done right, and you have centering done right, you create the economic exchanges that are more efficient and induce more economic activity. We call that agglomeration effects. And that's sector by sector and economy by economy. And by the way, of course, unemployment would have also fallen by 0.6% if we increased the compactness score by 10%. We would have seen a 1% increase in gross regional product based on the county, and I'll talk about that in the context of Clark County momentarily, and a 0.8% increase in income, per capita income. So let's look at all these things for Clark County, basically Las Vegas, to the year 2030. If 75%, not all, if 75% of all new development in this metropolitan area, or in this county, I should say, occurs within existing developed areas or already permitted areas, and you know where they are, and greenfield developments met placemaking principles, as I talked about earlier, your compactness score would run to about 150. Now that is the genius threshold. You can become a genius in urban form within 20 years, and I think relatively easily. If you did that, you'd generate 24,000 more jobs than you would create anyway, which means you reduce unemployment by those 24,000 jobs. You would generate $4 billion more dollars in economic activity over and above what you'd have anyway. And everybody on a per capita income basis, you'd all add $1,000 to your incomes per person, kid, grandma, and the rest of us, per person, over and above which would have occurred anyway. So these are the benefits of placemaking and TODs in the context of economic development. Thank you all very much. Now I think there's some time for